Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Saturday morning's thought. Another Saturday and the last of August. Who would have dreamt that we would still be in partial lockdown and being careful as we are when it all started in March? My goodness me, what a year we've had. And I'm sure Jesus would have told stories about things he observed during lockdown if he'd lived with us. We need to keep our eyes open for those wonderful moments when God speaks to us through something that someone does or something we observe. Because the story we're going to think about this morning is derived from an observation that Jesus had, and I suspect he may even have been a guest at a meal where something like this happened. And it's in Luke 14:7 to 11. And it's the story of the guests at a prestigious marriage feast. There's a person who arrives and he sits in one of the top table seats, one of the important seats, because he thinks he's very important in this feast, and he's due this seat. And when someone arrives who is more important than he is, the person, the host, comes and says to him, you have to move because this person, you're sitting in his seat. Much better, Jesus says in this story, if you're invited to a feast and you take the lowest place, and when the host arrives, he says, oh, what are you doing sitting down there at the end of the table? Come and sit higher. You are more worthy than that. What a difference it would be. Think of those. Imagine yourselves in those situations. You've sat in a seat and someone says to you, move. You're sitting in the wrong seat. This is a strange thing. It reminds me of a lady I met in hospital years ago, and she wouldn't go near a church. She didn't want to know anything about church. And the reason was that she had gone to a church when something awful was happening in her life, and she was in great distress and she was tearful, and she went as a last resort to the church on a Sunday morning, and she'd got the time of the service wrong and she was an hour early. So she sat, and I can't understand how anyone didn't actually approach her while they were preparing for the beginning of the service, but they didn't, and she sat there crying. And then as the time for the service approached, someone came to her and said, you'll have to move, you're sitting in Mrs. Jones's seat. And she got up and walked out, and she never went into a church ever again. And that was very sad, because in church we shouldn't have a hierarchy. We shouldn't have places that people always sit in. If you do that in your church, move around, because you'll meet some amazing people if you sit in a different place in your church. Don't get stuck in a seat. But this one, Jesus draws a conclusion from this story. You can picture it, can't you? This wedding feast and guests arriving and taking their seats, and one is sitting in the wrong place and is asked to move further down the table, and the other arrives and sits down the end of the table and moves up. And Jesus says at the end of it, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Every parable of Jesus has a key thought. And the key thought of this parable is, don't think too highly of yourself. That's a dangerous thing to do. We have to not exalt ourselves. We have to humble ourselves. Being humble means you don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. We are all sinners saved by grace, but we're no longer sinners. We are the redeemed of the Lord. We have on the clothes of righteousness. We are entitled to a seat at the banquet, but the place that we are to take is in the hands of the host, not in our hands. And so we should have the attitude of heart that says, I'm just so glad to be invited. It doesn't matter where I sit. I'm just so glad to be on the guest list and to be involved in what God is doing, and humbling ourselves. The truly humble do not exalt themselves. Years and years and years ago, I was in leadership, in the Church of England. I was a reader, and I went to a readers' meeting. It was in Winchester, actually, in the Bishop's Palace in Winchester. It was a readers' meeting, and I'd never met the bishop. I was very new to the whole thing, and I didn't know the bishop. I'd arrived, and we were just being offered little tidbits to eat along with a drink as we arrived. And the man who was standing with me and talking to me suddenly said to the person who was serving these things, "Bishop, what are you doing? You shouldn't be serving these canapes. You shouldn't be serving them. You should be being served. You're the host." And the bishop said, "But you're my guests, and it's my place is to serve you." That's what a bishop's job is, not to lord it, but to serve. And the person who was standing with me was horrified and couldn't bear the thought of the bishop doing such a menial task. But I think that bishop had the right idea about Christian leadership, because Christian leadership is all about serving. It's all about being the one who is willing to do things for others. We're to enable others, to encourage others, to lift others up, to promote others, not to be the one that the attention focuses on. Jesus, these are very wise words, well worth thinking about today. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Good thought. Have fun today thinking about it, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.